So the sources I have are basically, can you find them in the reference list there? That's about that. Now, you may also say, well, if you think I'm too... You're welcome. I haven't said everything yet. Just interrupt me and say if I go too fast or too slow, just tell me. Anyhow, climate is the point of departure, not in focus on this lecture. So, but anyhow, we have to have a reminder on the magnitude of the challenge before we discuss the challenge. You are also welcome. I can't start from the beginning.
No.
Okay, as you probably should know, carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere increases, so also the rate of increase. The second derivative is positive. The global temperature is increasing, so also the rate of increase. Still, the second derivative is positive. Land-based glaciers are melting, probably also in a faster rate I will show you. An Arctic ice sheet is melting, probably also in a faster rate. This is a picture of, I think it was from 2013 or 2011 or something, and where it should have been this in the summer. As you see, you can sail that way. In fact, you can sail that way also in the summer. There are some Swedish boats that time. You can sail around there in the summer. This is the temperature anomaly for the recent decade, 2004 to 2013. And you see, especially in the northern hemisphere, there is a temperature anomaly of more than +2 centigrades. So this is part of how we can see it. Let's go a little to this anyhow. Basically, this is based on data from partly from Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also from the Keeling Institute in Stanford, from the National Office of Atmospheric Administration. What you see here is the long scale for 800,000 years. I will not discuss how you get knowledge of carbon dioxide content for 800,000 years. That is something they know in this house, so some of you may know. So this is, you see, there is a national variation. If you put a glass there, you can go this. And here I am not on the carbon dioxide, I have also other, but let's focus on carbon dioxide, which is the red one. And then you see for 2,000 years it is a relatively strong stability, and then it goes up dramatically. We have the same thing as we have there, now we hit here. So let's go from that and take the last 50 years, and then you see it like this. In a house like this, you should probably know the variations here are due to seasonal variations, due to the biomass of the Earth absorbs carbon dioxide during summer. And let's take here a little and go here. And this is downloaded just 2 days, some days ago. This is November, including October data, and downloaded in November from the US. And temperature, of course, as I've shown here, and of course, depending on temperature, you get this effect of the cryosphere. Just illustrate something, some of the pictures here. This is the Arctic ice sheet, where I have here put, I think, July data for 20 years or something, and then you see this is the average decline of the surface of the Arctic ice in July data. Normally minimum is in August or September before it increases every year because it comes close. I think it is September data normally shows the minimum. But this is July data, so but irrespective of whether you take February data or July or August or September, you have the same line. Right? This is on the Arctic ice. Here are all the glaciers as measured in the World Glacier Monitoring Service system. And here you can see, I think this is the accumulated mass balance. You can also see it in yearly decline in this. So basically, you see there is a dramatic decline of mass like this. This is based on 30 measurement of 30 glaciers in the world. There are some methodological problems on how to define mass balance, but I don't want to go into that. This is a photograph on, I think it's July 22 in 2012. That day was an interesting day. The whole Greenland was melting. This is taken by an Indian satellite. That is not the same as the glacier, as that you have a glacier loss, that you have ice glacier loss over the year in Greenland, because you can imagine that if it becomes warmer, the atmosphere becomes more humid, and if you have humid atmosphere, it blows into this area, it can put down more snow. So for a long period, even if you have increasing temperature, you may face also increasing ice. But this is an indicator, it isn't that positive anyhow. Anyhow, nevertheless, there is a loss of glacier balance in Greenland, and this I recently taken from the International Panel of Climate Change. And you see that this is the accumulated loss in gigatons of ice here. I will not go into the details of how it works. You see it as a background. So, of course, this is related to burning fossil fuels. I don't have to go into those details. I will argue that we have a 200 years of growing addiction to carbon, which is what is reflected here. It starts roughly at the eve of the Industrial Revolution, especially when we started to use energy. We are addicted to carbon, total and per capita, and that I will talk about today. Economic growth strongly correlated to absolute increase in energy and carbon use. That is not. This is still so that we may have a relative decline of carbon. The carbon intensity in the economy may be declining, but that is not the same as that the absolute carbon emissions are declining, which is the only thing which counts. So we have to go from a 2 to 3% increase per year towards a 3 to 6% decrease of carbon. The problem is, can we manage it? Sweden is best in class among industrial countries. That will not put us as regards reducing and having low carbon intensity. But that it doesn't put us in the top front of countries globally. But it is at least reasonably good to start with. These are two pictures on the present carbon revolution we are still within. This is Alberta. You know the tar sand systems that look like this. And if I had widened the photograph, it would have taken until the horizon. This is another way which is more sophisticated. This is the fracking revolution. You can't see it on the surface. What happens underground. This is how it looks from the surface. Nice, but it isn't the same down there. Okay, let's go to see the magnitude of this carbon addiction. And here you have two pictures on it. I will give you a third. Let's start with this one. Here you see you have a logarithmic scale. That means a constant rate of increase provides you with a more or less steady line. You see a period of more than 4.6% increase of carbon dioxide emissions. Then you see somewhat lower between the world wars, and then you see dramatic increase of more or less 5% per year increase in carbon dioxide emissions per year after the Second World War. And then you see the period of relatively energy efficiency here after the oil crisis. So the rate of increase reduces to 1.5% per year. And here you can identify the growth of emerging economies, China, etc. And so you are up here to 3% per year in carbon dioxide emissions. This is the history. You can see it like this. Here we have just a normal scale, and you see the dramatic increase. It comes from coal, oil, gas, and things like that. To put it a little more perspective on it, I do it somewhat like this. This is more simple and clear graph. This is what it is about. Here is the Industrial Revolution. Here is our present time after the Second World War. And of course, under the curve here, you have the surface of the curve represents the accumulated emissions out in the atmosphere. And it is the accumulated emissions which counts, not the year increase. What you emitted yesterday is as important as what you emit today for the increase of temperature. Do I go too fast with this? Maybe it isn't new at all for you, so I should go still faster. Let's go then to now what I think is more close to what you expected me to talk about. Our addiction to carbon may be explained as fundamental and interdependent lock-ins. Are you familiar with the concept lock-in this area? then I would advise you to see these. There are a lot of papers from UNRU. I think that is, you can find them in energy policy, maybe some papers in research policy, maybe some papers in, yeah. So UNRU is related to this. The lock-in phenomenon is also related to economic historians like Brian Arthur and Paul David, who's an economist. When you get path dependence concept, you haven't heard about that? You have that. You can say lock-in is a cousin. The lock-in concept is a cousin to the path dependence. So if you have this convergence towards the path, you may call that convergence a lock-in. And then, of course, the problem is to break out of that path dependence. Check it. I will talk about our lock-in into a modernity related to energy and growth and our material obesity. I think this is important. I have a whole chapter of it in my book, and it was very interesting for me to write it. And honestly, I think that this is the point where the core issue as regards transformation. I think in our modern lifestyle, which develops, of course, from the 1820s and onwards, so even those people who were very hesitant and negative to all the dirty steam and coal and all that stuff, we managed to integrate it into our lifestyle. We managed to use it. This was the means, using more carbon was the means to travel around. I think the classical modern novel in Sweden was called Jonas Love Almqvist, Det går an. There was a woman in the 1830s who wanted to be liberated and move away and create a life of her own. In a modern lifestyle, it was very revolutionary in the 1830s. And the tool for her was to take the steamboat. And I think that is to some extent what we learned to do. Now we take the car or the airplane. So I think this is one of my favorite illustrations of the modern lifestyle we have to get away from in one way or another if you really want to transform the society. Do you know what this is a picture of?
Morning.
What?
Morning.
Yeah, morning.
Going to the school.
Yeah, this is the school, the typical school, where you have the casting. I mean, the modern middle class have to, you have a very intensive life puzzle to solve, and then you should put one children to the Montessori school, and another to the Waldorf school, and a third to some Italian pedagogics with Emilia Romana school. And then you have to go to your work and the other work for your husband or wife, and then in the afternoon you have to collect all these children, and then they should distribute it to violin lectures and to horse riding, tennis lectures, and then you go to gym before you go home, passing the shop to buy something. You can't do it without the car, as you live now. So I think, and this is the heavy thing we are into it, so to say. So when I, in 2007, wrote a paper, wrote an article in Dagens Nyheter on Brännpunkt, the gasoline price has to be doubled. I got 400 angry emails from people saying I was just a theoretician. I didn't know the problems of taking the children to school. And yeah. Then of course we will just go through a little of it. The size of the cars. Sweden has larger cars than any other country in the world. It is the VVV phenomenon, which the Swedes know but not the non-Swedes. Villa, the house. Volvo. Vovve, the dog. And all those, including your parents-in-law and everything, should be taken up to the ski areas in the winter and then to their second home and other places. And you have larger cars than in any other European country, and they also consume a lot. The size of the cars. The four-wheelers, in fact you wouldn't believe it, but that amount of cars has increased dramatically recently. These kinds of tools has also, this is one of the fastest growing tools in Sweden. They are useful for nothing because they are not allowed. But everybody have them in outside the urban areas. You are not allowed to drive those on the streets. You're only allowed to have them in the forests and on the backyard. And this is a young 10-year boy driving. It's really something for young men to learn to know. Then we have the air transport. And this goes back to the 1820s when people learned to love the steam engine. You are all favoring a dramatic transformation, but you all want to go to Galapagos and just be ecotourists investigating this thing. So this is a part of the ambiguous position you have to this transformation. As a second, the clothing. I think in Sweden we have doubled the use of clothes during the recent 25 years. Do we really need that? And meat consumption has increased all over the world, even so in Sweden, dramatically. It has also doubled within 25 years or so. And this is part of a material consuming and energy consuming lifestyle. The smartphones, the energy consumption of the digital world, including your smartphones, including your computers and things like that, is of the magnitude as the energy, and the carbon dioxide emissions from that is of the magnitude, same magnitude as the global carbon dioxide emissions from air transport. Not in Sweden, so continue with doing, using your smartphones in Sweden, because in Sweden they are run on electricity, which basically is not carbon dioxide emitting. But who was from Poland here? You. Don't use it in Poland. Okay, that's about the modern lifestyle. I think this is a real challenge and honestly, have you read Naomi Klein's book? This changes everything, or something like that. Yeah. I think she underestimates these things. It's very easy for her to put everything on capitalism. You can consider that in the discussion. Whether, to what extent it's better, maybe she's a very good American examples. But we have to make up with these things, and it doesn't matter. We can't blame Wallenberg for all these things. So this is it contributes with complexity to our analysis of the transformation which comes. That's my main criticism of Naomi Klein's book.
Why should we read it?
Pardon?
Why should we read it? Why is it good?
You shouldn't always read books which builds up your views. You should read books which challenges your views, and then it's much tougher to find out what is it which is good in it, what is it which is bad. So read books and texts you don't like. But I like it. But I think she makes it too easy for herself.
But on the other hand, those looks at, I mean, they look to me like more symptoms or consequences. We should be able to identify the sources to those new trends, right? They're not trends that emerge in themselves. This is what Naomi Klein's doing. She's linking those new trends, social phenomena, to specific institutional structures and our criticism of capitalism. But unless we can identify other sources, I think the alternative to just saying that those trends just emerge by themselves and the other source itself is unsatisfactory.
I see your point. Let's do it like that. I will not. You could discuss this afterwards in other places, because I like to criticize capitalism. It isn't that, but consider it. I will come back to things which can be done, and then we can discuss whether this is necessary, can or cannot be done, and what are the institutional changes we need to have. But at least I make a question. You can consider it, and then I can. Okay, let's go to the growth thing. I talked about modernity, growth, and obesity. Let's go to the growth thing. You should know it. I don't know exactly what you have studied in this students. The industrial metabolism, which is more material than ever. I will come back to that. The world economy is heavier than ever. I have waited, of course. I will tell you how. There is a strong correlation between economic growth and energy use in general, and between economic growth and fossil fuels in particular. Historically, it's very clear. Even if there is a decoupling between energy use and growth. This is just in relative terms, not in absolute terms. You see the difference? And the intensity declines, but not the absolute use of it. In fact, there is even in growing energy intensity per capita, insofar as growth rate of economy is faster than the growth rate of the population. You have it? Okay. Mankind has never, during 2 centuries, managed to combine long-term economic growth with reduced inputs of material and or energy. This is a challenge. And I will come back to that, but let us look a little on the growth of material intensity. Obesity. You can do this in many ways. I just made some indices from 1910 on the use of copper, aluminium and pig iron. You just have to pick up 10 things like this, and as these are circulated in the system, you can say that this is the weight of the global economy, because then it just transformed further in the value chains. So you can see then that comparing 1990 with 2013, you can say that on the average, the global economy today is twice as heavy as it was in 1990. And then you can ask, is this necessary? And of course, how do we transform this away from? These are the numbers. You see it on copper. From 92 to, what do I have? Kiloton. You see it on aluminium. You see it in megaton on pig iron. And you can continue with other things. So this is part of it. And you use energy to take this up from the underground and transform it. Let's go further to the resource question. I know this is things that are analyzed in this house. There is an old discourse on resource economics, focusing on whether there are enough reserves. Will they be depleted? The origin of this, one of the origins was, of course, the limits to growth thing, which came in 1973 or 72 or something, with the Jörgen Randers and the Meadows couple, Donella and there is also found with origin here in Uppsala a peak oil discussion. It is a recent illustration to that. We are running out of oil. This may have relevance in some cases on global level, some rare methods, and in more cases on local level. In this country we are running out of that. All countries do not have lithium, for example. But the new approach in resource economics and resource theory relates to planetary boundaries. That is, the carrying capacity and resilience of our planet, which is somewhat the other way around. This includes all human impact on planetary system. One core issue is whether the atmosphere can accommodate all greenhouse gases produced by mankind. And here we have 2 positions. One is that we are running out of oil. The other is that is not a big problem. We can't use all the fossil fuels which are there because we can't dispose of the waste, the carbon dioxide, so to say. And this is a core issue in some of the economy. There are some financing analysts, think tanks in London who are analyzing, saying that the stock market hasn't even identified this. Big firms, based on fossil fuels, are valued as the total value of what they have underground. But the real problem is they cannot be allowed to take it up when the Earth goes to a catastrophe. So they shouldn't be valued like that. It is the stranded assets phenomenon, if you haven't heard about it. The stranded assets phenomenon. Okay, one core issue is whether, the problem is not lack of resources. We cannot use them without destroying the planet. This is something to consider. And of course you can discuss it also with the other team here in Uppsala if you want, how they evaluate this thing. Let's look into orthodox economics and its origin. Maybe you have a lot of economics here, so maybe I could just give you some ideas to it. Let me start with the economic historian Landers, the unbound Prometheus. I can have a whole lecture on him, I will not. He talks about the dynamics of the Industrial Revolution, and he said the dynamics came from machinery, which to some extent is brain power. We make more clever machinery. using our brains to develop new technical solutions. External power and natural resources. What you see here is that he was very clear that brain power is one thing, external power, basically that was coal, and then was oil. But when you go to the classical production functions in economic theory, you see that the output, this is the classical production function, is a function of capital and labor. You have lost the energy. Then, of course, in the 1950s, you've also, in fact, here lost brain power. What you have here is capital, more physical capital. You see the machinery which stands there, but not the energy related to making it efficient. I mean, from 1 ton of iron, you can make good machinery and bad machinery. You see the point. So, Abramovich and Solov in the 1950s identify that this technology is in here. So you may put it, for example, like this, that output is a function of technology, capital, and labor. You can also, if you want to be more sophisticated, discuss, should we put it in this function formula, or is this part of the capital and part of the labor? This is then the human capital, our brilliance, at least for some of us. And this is partly put into endogenous growth theory, knowledge as part of technology. Agion and Howitt has put textbook, advanced textbook in growth economics from 2009. But then we have something for this, technology and brain power, but we still haven't included the external power. Energy and resources got lost under base in this function. So why? Part of it is that you have declining energy prices. So that means you could to some extent say that energy isn't that important, it is just a very few percent of the total output, we don't need it. We can neglect from it, or can we? So it becomes a minor problem because it is cheap. But I mean, I would, if I was focusing on this, say, is that a good way of neglecting it? So we have lost energy input in this thing. And that means economies have a problem here in growth content. Part of it then relates to the productivity concept, and I will relate with my input. So let us return now to the brain power, knowledge, technology, and external power, for example, fossil energy. Now let's focus on productivity. You can increase productivity with brain power. For example, develop a new alloy of steel and make it very, very elastic and hard. Then you can reduce the thickness of it in a saw. If you reduce the thickness of it in a saw from 3 millimeters to 1, you reduce the friction with about 60 or 70%. That means you can use less energy to cut a tree. This is brain power. Better technology. You can have many other illustrations, but this is one of my favorites. But then, of course, another way to increase productivity is to put in more external power in it. And this is my favorite hate object. You see what it is? If you go out, you see Academica Hus uses it everywhere here. You increase your productivity in this system with putting, you have a small tank with fossil fuels here, and then you go on doing this. This kind of productivity increase, you can see so if you talk about historical productivity increases, part of it is this. And you can't count on that productivity increase in the transformation ahead. Because that is what we are going to avoid, to get rid of. So if you talk about historical productivity increases of 3% per year, and say we can assume that in the future, that is wrong. If that is based on input of fossil fuel, you must have some other things in it. In this particular case, you can go to Clas Ohlson and buy an electrical one. And that will partly solve the problem. If you don't want to use the classical way of taking care of this. That means, can we assume business as usual productivity increase for the future? So when we discuss the transformation ahead, we say we have had 3% productivity increase, we can account for that in the future, but I said we can't. unless we can show that we are moving to new technologies we don't need fossil fuels. Yeah. Let me turn a little now. So the challenge now is to transform this. This is Europe of today. Sweden is part of it. We have somewhat lower unemployment level and things like that. But Europe has an unemployment level of 11 to 12%. Some countries have 25. Youth unemployment is basically twice national unemployment rates in those countries. We have low growth and large deficits in those. So the commercial analysis and medicine to help this is pump up demand, public and or private, create incentives, reduce restrictions, increase productivity, knowledge and knowledge. But what you do want is to get is a 3% growth per year to reduce unemployment to 10 years. But this growth is based on increasing the demand, so you could buy more systems like this, or more consumption products and things, or the classical ones which will increase the obesity of the economy and will increase the carbon dioxide emissions. The decline in carbon dioxide emissions in Europe since 1990 has been roughly 20%. That's good, you're on the right way. The problem is that about 10 units of percentage of this comes from the transformation of your country. The Eastern European after 1990. So between 1990 and 1995, there was a decline primarily based on the Eastern European transformation in Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, and Finland. There is still much to do, but that was the first. Then there was stability from 1995 until 2008. And then we have the last units of percent, about 10, 9 or something, between 2007 and today. But that isn't related to very efficient policy, it is related to the decline of the European economy, the crisis from 2007. It's very clear that when the economy goes down, carbon dioxide emission goes down. Now we want to restore the economy. That means, in reality, if we do not formulate another policy, increase the carbon dioxide emissions again, up to the 2008 level, unless we do something about it. You see the point? What should we do then? What I will talk about is that time for change. I will focus a lot on transformation. I will deliver a macroeconomic approach to analyze it and a structural approach. This is primarily Keynesian and this is primarily related to Swedish economist. In fact, he was head of the Swedish Industrial Research Institute, Erik Dahmén was his name, and I will make some reflections on policy. This is a favorite picture. It isn't just only a wind power unit. It's more than that. You can find this in Hannover, I think. It's made by wood. This is a good way of storing carbon dioxide, carbon capture and sequestration. You store it by building construction, but the best thing, of course, is if you can build wind power stations by wood. It isn't fully wood, there is some SKF things in there. And in fact, the wings are not yet carbon fiber by wood, but the tower is all wood. But it is possible, I will discuss with carbon fiber experts, so you can make these by wood in the future. Okay, first the time dimension. Is there time for us to work with this? To get some kind of more positive things, so we don't end up in a course like this, going to psychologists. That is probably still possible to reach 2 centimeters apart. I will give you 3 ways of handling it. The first is the time dimension. We have to halve our emissions before 2030. The second half before 2050, and the third half before somewhere in the end of the century. So we don't have to solve everything ourselves, so they need it. I also will put a systems dimension in it, which is more relevant to us as academics. We can talk about halving the activity level. Assume that you have a system like the automotive system. You say, if you halve the distance transport, half the use of cars. That's one part of halving. It can be distributed over this time. Efficiency, doubling energy efficiency in the systems. You don't have to, you must not necessarily use those very fuel consuming cars as we do in Sweden. And the third half is substitution. You substitute half of the fuel you use in those that twice as efficient cars which are used half as much. That's the way to, so yeah.
I mean, we're already past the, like, 250 or 250 parts per million, so we need to meet the targets for 2050, like, to like just stabilize the climate, we need to actually sequester. So we need to be able to.
You mean it's no idea?
What?
You mean it's no idea?
No, I mean, well, it's not just. I mean, I don't think reducing consumption or becoming more efficient or substituting. I mean, that's also part of substitution. But on top of that, I think we need to also create systems that support ecosystem function and sequester carbon and that's a different. So it's one thing to reduce the continuing pollution, but it's another thing to be able to take off.
Yeah, I know. But let us look at these things, and then of course you may increase the biomass areas and things like that. Let's take part to part. You say this. What you say is this is not enough.
Yeah, to meet the 2%, 2 degrees.
But the problem, no, I will be try to be very constructive. Is it any idea to discuss exactly what happens over there in the very distant future? If we start to go down, and then it may be so that we start the process, and then we may discuss that we have to sharpen it after 2015, something like that.
Of course, we have to do whatever we can as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But I think we need to also focus on ways to support ecosystem services.
Let's focus on
go from reducing consumption to actually producing or supporting ecosystem function. So creating systems or whatever that actually takes off greenhouse gases from the atmosphere.
I don't say, but I don't say I'm against that. This is just to illustrate 3 ways of reducing the aggregate carbon dioxide emissions. And then, I mean, the time dimension is one, the systems dimension is another. And the third, before I let you in, is to put some kind of generation perspective. I think that is important. We start the process and enable our children to continue, and then our grandchildren can continue. And it's no idea for us to discuss exactly the details of what will be done beyond 2050. What we have to bend down the curves and focus on these things. And this is not very revolutionary in itself, but this may contain a lot of activities. But hitherto I haven't put the activities into the model. And what I say here is this kind of 3 times halving, half times half times half, puts us somewhere on a global level to where we have to aim. About 10% of the present emissions. And then there are other things which we can go into details if you are going into the IPCC text and others, that if you delay this, the problem becomes more serious and things like that. But I can't talk about that, and there are other experts on this. Now you had a reaction on this.
Yeah, so I don't mean to be nitpicky here, because I react to the word probably up there, and that is not really representative of the current knowledge level when it comes to whether or not we can meet the 2 degree Celsius target. I'm thinking about this article that I read in Science by Thomas Stocker, that basically had this modeling exercise where they look at when do we need to start decreasing the absolute emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And long story short, it kind of seems that between 2 and 4 degrees is actually more probable than saying that we could probably reach. But I think that your general idea here is to paint the picture of a possible transformation. And if we then decrease and start actually decreasing global emissions really soon, then it might be possible. But I would say that it's not really probable.
But I don't say that I say it is probably still possible. I don't say that the outcome.
Fair enough.
Do you accept that?
I accept that.
And then in addition, I think it's a good behavior of me, I mean, I read James Hansen, I read others, and I'm not a climatologist by myself, so I'm based on this. But this is reasonably in line with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recent reports. And I have no solid foundation for myself to go very much beyond that. But this is probably still possible. It is not the same as this is a probable outcome. Okay. I'm sorry I'm too positive. Okay, let's go then. So this is what we have to do. This is the 2011 World Energy Outlook. This is where we are going now. And you seem to agree on that. This is, if you consider all policies hitherto declared, this is what we have to do. And according to International Energy Agency, and they are not known to exaggerate these kind of things, if you say so. Then, of course, if you delay this, you have a tougher problem in the end, because it is the surface which counts, not the emission. But you know that. Then, of course, we have some problems which economists discuss. I will just mention them. We have this kind of discounting thing. And of course, when you all start with this kind of discounting on when should we start and things, now we should say we have to start immediately. So this is more or less an irrelevant thing. That's my opinion, but that has some impact on economists. You can also say that is this kind of accounting relevant or non-marginal change? I would say no, you can consider it. And you can also say, is business as usual a realistic zero alternative? What do I mean with that? That is everybody even those who say this is cheap, it only costs you 2% of gross domestic product to transform. Even those who say that. And then we say, okay, that is good. We don't have to say it is expensive. But even those who say it is cheap, I say they are not really safe out. Because what is the alternative? As long you must count what is business as usual, what is the alternative to which you compare this 2% increase of costs. So I think we have a problem discussing what it costs to transform. The problem is we have to transform. You see the point? That is at least my argument. You can consider it. Then, of course, what do you discount use it for? What is the unit of measurement? Gross domestic product. But does it capture all what we really want to have in a decent world, so to say? In addition to this, we have the time dimension. And that is, transformation takes time. Railways, 10 to 20 years. Grid, building houses, lifestyles, maybe this takes more. Phasing out cars, thing. This is, just to illustrate, this is a very serious thing. If you really take climate change seriously, we have to transform very rapidly. But we still sell a hell of a lot of cars which people who buy them for 400,000 crowns, we can't just ruin them. They will never support the transformation if you ruin half the people just because they have a lot of things which are not, shouldn't be allowed in the future. So we have a lot of things, all these things takes time. So if you want to reach something in 2030, we have to turn out relatively rapidly now. But we can do rapid things. Buses, you can immediately start to transform into buses. Some of you say buses are a bad solution, you should go to railways. But I say start with buses, you can do tomorrow. The railway will run within 20 years at best. Wind power, you can, I will give you back. Wind power, you can raise them one by one. You don't have to construct all of them. Photovoltaics, you can raise them immediately. Some of you can just go to Johan Ehrenberg's thing in Katrineholm and buy it tomorrow and then come back and install it in your house. Transforming to ethanol and biodiesel, you can do more and less immediately. The technology is there, and then some of you say ethanol isn't the best thing in the world, and then we can have a long discussion on that. Now I have a lot of people. You start, and then
what about agriculture? Isn't that like, if you look at the energy consumption, like, where I've heard that some of the best strategies to mitigate and climate change is agriculture. So if you make that both as a sink of greenhouse gases and as something you can actually change the management rather quick.
I'm not against it. I'm not an expert in agriculture. I know this is was connecting with various languages universities, so there must be some experts on that. But of course, things which are not mentioned here are not necessarily bad. It just illustrates the phenomenon. You had a comment.
Yeah, I really want to ask you why you keep proposing this, because I think it's very dangerous.
What?
this keep sticking to ethanol and biodiesel, because we have seen that it's basically even the current amount of production of biodiesel is so counterproductive in terms of environmental effects, and also
Yeah.
that I don't see it as a solution at all anymore. What do you think?
There's cases in Sweden where you have farms using biodiesel, they grow their own food, their own fuel, so then they become like
But
carbon.
That's ethanol. That's different when, in terms of greenhouse gas.
Okay,
So this is
let's take it like this, because this is of course I introduced questions with the council. I will defend ethanol not only because I drive a car which is run by ethanol, but there are other things, because that is scrapped, so I don't use it so much either. But the car I have, which stands there, runs on ethanol. But I'm also, you can run it like this. You have, basically, now I just open for it, we don't have to solve it, and then you can have a group discussion on it during the rate of this course. There are two means to use energy in the future if you get rid of all the fossil fuels. And I suppose that most of you are not that fond of nuclear power. One is directly use of sun through photovoltaics and things like that. The other is wind power, and you will see I'm really fond of wind power. And the third is the indirect use of sunshine, and that is transforming it to various forms of biomass. And then you face a set of problems in relating to biomass. How much do you truly use to food and things, all that. But part of that is, one way is via biomass, you can use it for various kind of bio-based gasoline, bio-based biodiesel, and methanol and other things. But these are the means you have. And before that, I will just allow you. And then, of course, you will face other institutional problems, how much should we allocate to food and all that stuff. But if you say that we can't use the plan B, that is, use biomass for this transformation, I think you have a very heavy burden in the discussions, but you can have discussions on that afterwards. You have reacted on that.
No, just because you didn't mention like the extension of hydropower and also wave energy potentially in the future.
Okay. Waves are also related to the sun, of course.
And geothermal energy.
Oh, I agree with you. Now we have many people here. Over there?
I just wonder, what is the grid you refer to?
The grid. The electric grid, the network. To make the electricity efficient. You take some wind out there, but you use it here. And you have to dramatically transform the grid to fix this. Okay, we don't solve the problem, but we realize that we have something to discuss there. And I know I go very fast through it, but this is the role of a guest lecturer. I give you some ideas, and then we don't solve all the problems, we discuss it a little, and then you continue and take it up afterwards. For example, we cannot solve the whole biofuel thing. I will argue that it depends on how we use the global biomass and how we organize it and distribute it between, on the one hand, food, on the other, fuel, but I also will argue for that we should use it for construction, because that is the best way for having carbon capture and sequestration. So we will have an enormous scramble for biomass in the future. We are already going on that direction. So this is the struggle we have to solve political and institutional. Okay, now let me go to the macroeconomics of the transformation. This is, I don't know whether there are any economists here. There are normally not that many economists in courses like this. But basically my approach is what may be labeled post-Keynesian, related to Keynes, which has a focus on the demand sector, the demand in the economy, so to say. This is a way to formulate demand, which is my way to formulate it. Keynes would have done it somewhat different. What I do is identifying three different, you can classify the demand in the economy in three boxes. One is the dirty box, the black box, all the bads, the bad goods, so to say. This is the green sector. Here is all that demand which is basically not carbon dioxide emitting. And the blue sector, what is that? It is the enabling sectors. those sectors which in fact are bad on the one hand, emit carbon dioxide, but we have to use to create the conditions for the green sector. We'll see what I mean. Construction of a railway. That is a bad thing, the construction phase emits an enormous amount of carbon dioxide, which makes it possible to have a carbon dioxide-free transport. And what we have to do is, of course, and this cuts through the Keynesian system. He didn't discriminate between different forms of demand like this. This is my improvement of the Keynesian system. He had the classical forms of demand here: consumption, investment, saving, exports, and imports. These were the demand categories. These sectors cut through all this. Consumption could be green or black. Investments, basically here. Saving could be, isn't directly related to here. And then exports and imports could be all these things. You import the black things from China, for example. This has to be reduced relatively. Of course, we are already doing that, but absolutely and totally, that is the challenge. Okay. Then we have to increase investment in sustainable systems. We should eliminate this because we can't help it at all, because the carbon dioxide emissions we could allow ourselves are probably related to this in the future. But we should increase investments in sustainable systems like public transport, energy systems. All capacity-adding investments in roads are cancelled because if you are reducing the car transport, you don't need to expand capacity in the future road system. We should increase in our buildings and make sustainable systems. So this is the Keynesian model. Transform demand to that. And it is difficult because we now argue for increasing the demand, and many are glad now that the economy is going up because demand increases. But from our perspective, it isn't enough. It is bad, in fact, that this demand increases. It should be this demand. And now I will give you some provocative things of the day after tomorrow. This is maybe too much materialistic, but just to identify things that the day after tomorrow must not necessarily be very bad. This is an ecological wine. You have to transport it, but you can do it reasonably good. This is one way. What I have here is a service economy is also putting a lot of emphasis on culture. All cultural services are basically green. And that kind of service economy should be dramatically increased if we really want to be post-industrial and reduce the material intensity of the economy. This is basically made of wood. This is Norgavel, a Swedish green furnishing firm. The good thing with this one and this one is that they are very expensive. That means you wouldn't get so much over for other forms of consumption. So focusing on design, material objects, focusing on service, on material of objects which are very service and design intensive. We reduce the material content of the whole amount of spending you have. That should be positive from our point of view. So from that point of view, I am very petit bourgeois then, saying that these kind of things are probably a good thing to buy. If you really want to go to fashion, you should promote it. This kind of bourgeois lifestyle goes into too much fashion because they are extremely expensive. You see the point? Then we can always discuss, is this the only way to become green and things like that. But yes, and this is of course an electrical thing. It is a blue. It creates a lot of carbon dioxide to produce it, but when you travel with it, you can, at least in Sweden, charge it and travel the total carbon dioxide free transport. These are some things just to illustrate the day after tomorrow what it could contain. It isn't necessarily dark and grey and black. It could contain things like this. When moving away from the industrial thing is reducing the material content, and that means increasing the service content in the material you really want to use. Okay, then what I discussed then, I'll take this transformation to this economy. In my book, and this is not necessarily so obvious for the non-Swedes here, but in Sweden we have in fact a dramatic transformation during the 60s and 70s in Sweden. It was a transformation by intention, caused by the fact that in Sweden we wanted to have reasonably high wages, and we wanted to have a very competitive economy. Sweden is a very open country. And then it was by intention there was an enormous transformation of the Swedish industry and lifestyle in the 60s and 70s. It was tough, at least for people like me, who was living in the northern part of Sweden, from which many people left. This old Swedish model contained incentives for people to change their profession. You got money to change it. You are that kind of work, we help you to get a non-profession. Change employer. You are working with an employer, a firm which is not competitive, that will be closed down, you have to move. Change place of living. You live in an area where there are no employment, you should go to another, we will help you to do that. Closure of old industries and processes. You compensated the losses of the losers to make them positive to the transformation. You reduce the profits of the winners to make this transformation legitimate. To create legitimacy. You can't, of course, produce too much money in the advancing sectors, otherwise people who are the losers will be accepted. And you create competitive modern structures. This is the old Swedish model. It's written a lot of it in economic history, in political science, and economics, etc. There are also studies from abroad on this Swedish model.
What do you mean by competitive modern structures? The last point?
This was the means to create a very competitive Swedish industry, which still is there. Sweden has one of the highest export rates of the gross domestic products in the world. It's very high, it's very competitive, the Swedish trade balance of current account is positive. You created firms which could compete on a global level. And this was created to a large extent during the 1970s by intention. And the argument was to create and combine competitiveness with high salaries. And that means they promoted productivity increases and you promoted closing down of old industries. It was not, some industries survived, some things like that, but it was a policy by intention. You can find books on it also in English.
Maybe he reacts against the word structures instead of maybe enterprises. That is.
But this is the industry. I will not keep the structure, but okay. What I say now, creating a new modernity, you can do a similar process again. I don't say you should do exactly this, but this can be done again. But then, by then, focus was on productivity in the transformation. And as you know, I don't focus on the classical kind of productivity. What I focus in, now focus must be on climate mitigation and adaptation. The important thing is a policy which use the means for a transformation, actively works with transforming society. And that is what I will end up with in my discussions. I have a lot of how you can approach this, and I will not talk about everything here. But the means for doing this is using the concept development block. It was developed by the old economist Erik. It is primarily used by a lot of innovation economists, to which I identify myself. Historians use this very much. The historians of technology at KTH use this concept very much. What we talk about here is the uneven development of industries and technologies. Development is not in equilibrium. The transformation process is promoted by disequilibria, created by necessities and opportunities. And this is an illustration of this. And many have illustrated this. Damien did it, but there are others. Can you imagine what the reason for this is? No. Do you know what it is?
Increasing productivity.
Yeah, but it is there is during the 18th century, there was an imbalance in the development of the textile and confectionery industry. So that when the spinning system developed, that created an excess capacity of spinning. That means the weaving system was a bottleneck. And then the weaving system developed, and then we increased with this kind. Those of you who weave know how it works. And then the spinning system became a bottleneck. Then you have this kind of continuous disequilibrium, creating business opportunities or creating necessities for engineers to solve problems, bottleneck problems all the time. There is a historian of technology named Tom Hughes. He created a concept of salience and reverse salience, which is pretty much the same. This kind of, you are never in equilibrium. There is always something where you have to focus your engineering capacity, or where companies can focus their development structure to develop it. And then they develop that, and then there's something else becomes the necessity to solve. And this is the process of development. It is never in equilibrium. I will have some short related now to energy and transport, just to illustrate transformation processes we can have. And the reason for me to have it is not just, as I identify most of the literature in your course, we have somewhat an aggregated discussion. But I think to become convincing in discussing transformation, I think it's necessary to go a little down in showing this is possible, this is what could be done, illustrate, we can count on this, and things like that. So this is my, if you want to say, this is my mantra. Be somewhat more concrete. And I will talk a little about energy. And let's leave this.
Can I just ask a real question before you move on?
Yeah.
A point of clarification, I'm being kind of cocky here. So your interpretation of this new modernity that you were kind of started up with arguing for, that we need to go from this idea of the middle class Swede that goes with her or his car, picks up the kids, yada yada, to a bourgeois lifestyle where the consumer buys fair trade condoms and drinks go labeled coffee and
no, I'm not necessarily arguing for a new kind of petit bourgeois to solve it. It isn't that. It will be clear in the end. So what you basically have to do is that you have, if you want to transform outside the seminar room in the university, where you can agree on the best way to go, you must get people with you that we are going to another transformation. You will get out of the path where we are locked in and move in another direction. And you must convince people to follow. Then you must, I'm not talking about the last slides. Then you must convince, this is possible, we can do it. It isn't necessarily so that you have to go back to the Stone Age. And this is then, of course, we must identify how these processes can be done. And then, of course, it is somewhat ironic that I have the Louis Vuitton thing there, of course. Also the wine thing. The future is not necessarily a future without wine. So this is my argument here. Obviously I'm provoking, but that was my reason.
Then I see, okay, you're using this as a kind of Trojan horse, as a sales speech to just convince people that have money that can create momentum for this. Okay, I buy this, but then what are the real transformation that should follow from this? Because I think I also agree that this is not a direction. This could be, a strategy, but what is the real transformation? You're talking about, and that is true, my confusion is on the term modernity and structure, modern structure. What are those modern structures that we need to transform?
You have a point in my presentation here. I talked first about modernity, and we had discussed that. But I'm now focusing in two illustrations on what this transformation is about. The energy and transport. I could continue with the housing and with natural resource-based industries and things, but I will focus on two of the blocks, energy and transport, to show what it is about. And then, of course, the other thing, what falls out in the consumption thing is this falls out of when you press it, screw it in these things. So let me continue with energy and a little with transport, and then finally meeting it up with policy and things like that. Are you satisfied with that? And then you
Depending on what you're
interrupt.
gonna
Then
say.
you interrupt me if I lose your focus.
Okay.
Let's leave this. This is more technical thing. We'll just mention it. If are there any people here working with wind power or solar photovoltaics things? Something? No engineers for that. A little. Then I just mention why I have this and these things. Why I have this thing. Of course, it is so that there is a discussion on that we can't have the whole system filled with photovoltaics and wind power, because it isn't so that the sun always shines and the wind always blows. How do we solve the problem when that is not the case? And then you have a long discussion on how to solve that problem. And I've meet many people like that in regard to the technology and other things. And then we have to discuss, on the one hand, how do we balance the system? And on the other, how do we create this unbalance which promotes development? This is exactly what faces now in Germany. Germany is in a tipping point. They produce so much wind power and so much solar power that they are, the classical coal plants are challenged. And now they want to reduce the wind power and solar power because their base load in the coal plants is threatened. They are on the tipping point. And this is what I understand. My basic argument. It is possible to have a system with very, very much wind power and solar power and still have it balanced. But we don't have to discuss it more. So let's go just to show the magnitude. You wanted to have what kind of restructuring am I for? This is an illustration on the energy system. It could be done. And that we partly also contribute to those who are scared of that we should use too much biofuels, bioenergy, because this is just an illustration. We can transform the Swedish system. We can have about 25,000 windmills. I will show you some statistics. We should have an installed capacity of 75,000 megawatt. You can do it on 5% of the forest area. It will produce about 70 to 140 terawatt hours. You can use that for closing down the nuclear power plants if you want that. You can feed it into the cars. You can export it. I'm very much in favor of exporting it to help Poland to transform. That will necessitate half a dozen very heavy cables to the continent. You export electricity. You have to increase the electricity price, which is a challenge not in Sweden, but not least in countries like Poland. And you will create some balancing challenges then when you produce too much into it. Technologically, you can use it with upgraded technology. The cost you can calculate on it, and 60 billion SEK per year during 20 years will cost about 1.6% of gross domestic. This is a means to do it, to transform the electrical system. And it is not unrealistic. I will show it here. I have just benchmarked against Germany. Is there anyone from Germany here? Yeah, you. You may say, I don't say the German system is the best. I said there are a lot of problems with it. But anyhow, you can benchmark against it and say, this is what the Germans have installed in wind power. That is 94.5 megawatt per 1,000 square kilometers. I know the problems with you all know that we all want to have wind power, but not here. The NIMBE phenomenon. Sweden has just a tenth of that. Although Sweden is much less populated country. You have roughly 10 times as many population in Germany as we have in Sweden.
And you're just as good.
Pardon?
Then you're just as good. Then Sweden is just as good.
No.
If you multiply by 10.
No, but it isn't the population you compare with. It is the square kilometers. So in fact, you could increase the investment in wind power with a magnitude of 10 comparing to Germany. Because you don't put the windmill on the top of the head of the people, you put it on the ground. So I think you could increase it 10 times if you really want to. And this is, I compare with other countries. So there is, of course, a potential if you really want to have wind power. We haven't even used it in Sweden. And the reason, of course, is that we are one of the largest nuclear power plant systems in the world. So that has created this kind of necessity. Then, of course, you will have some technical problems. We don't have to discuss them. But I think this is important. This is a potential for wind power. You can make somewhat similar on photovoltaics. This will, of course, create problems, as it has done in Germany, but these are problems that can be solved. And this is one way of the transformation of the system, which could be used to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions in Sweden, which can be used to transform, to change lifestyles and things. And I will just give you this transport system also. This is the challenge also. In fact, you don't know, but this is also a picture from school. The morning in school in Stockholm, delivering children. Very rapid. You can approach the transport system similar to the electrical system. Everything which is connected to transport, you put in the same system and it hangs together. And the problem is how to fix it up. The automotive system, air transport, railways, maritime, supporting industries. And of course this is related to supply chain, it is to logistics and lifestyle, very much lifestyle related. In fact, the free choice of schools in Sweden is of course very related to that we have cars. In my book I write a lot of it. That is also in Sweden, so we have to solve this kind of mobility problem when we want to transform our lifestyle. What kind of mobility should we have, how should we solve it, and what is the balance between various means of communication. Separated families connect their family networks with cars. Half of Swedish children or something like that have more than 10 kilometers to their other parents, something like that. Not 19%. And that network, then you need to meet the family together, partly with cars. So you have a lot of that kind of problems. When I look to this, we of course we have to fix this. This is the present expansion plans in the Scandinavian aircraft plants. Arlanda, they're growing 67%. They are investing for 67% growth of air traffic. Gardermoen up to 200% expansion. Kastrup, they would want to double. They are scared that Arlanda and Gardermoen and Helsingfors will take over. And Helsingfors is going to increase the air transport to China. This is just to illustrate the dimensions of the transformation of the transport system. How 80% of personal transport in Sweden is by car. That is more or less the same all over Europe. If we really want to start this transformation, we have to reduce this to 60%. But that is assuming that people travel as much. That will double public transport from 20 to 40%. Then you can say you can also reduce the need for transport. But that will need doubling of bus investments from 1,600 buses to 3,000 buses per year until 2030. I do this very concrete to show this is possible, it is not far distant. This should be done in real near time, and you can do it all from this year to next year. And then you have to create incentives for this. But it is possible. And I don't say it is enough, but it is what you can do. And then somebody would say this is not the best way to transport, or what that's what you wanted to say.
My question will be then, why hasn't this already happened? Or just let me rephrase it maybe for optimists, why this has happened in small scale places and not in others? So my point there is just, I'm all fine with this, but it hasn't happened because of the structures, modern structures you were referring to, because of some type of sources that Naomi Klein is exposing. And I think this is great, but this is not going to happen. And then when you're talking about incentive, then we are kind of referring to those modern structures as well that are creating an ecosystem of incentive. That makes solution like that just not happening. And I think if we talk about deep transformation, it's fine to have a plan and to agree on the detail there, but it's not going to happen if we don't address what makes this not happen.
So I should instead talk about.
I think we should have a global discussion and reflection on those modern structures that are hindering those type of projects, their development as an idea and their implementation as a practice.
Yeah.
Why is this not happening? Is I think an interesting question. It's not because the idea is not there.
Well, first of all, people don't know that it's possible. I mean, it wasn't until Jacobson in 2012 that he published an article saying that it was possible to power the whole globe on renewable energies. Not nuclear, just like wind, solar, geothermal, with existing technologies today, you can actually power, like supply the whole world. And they did a whole article from Stanford, Jacobson, 2010 or 12, and then another one in 2013.
So now that we know, the transformation is going to happen like that.
Well, now that we know, it becomes a political possibility. Before, it's like if you were saying like, hey, we're gonna, I mean, with the limits to growth in the 70s, you got the first information that we're gonna run into a tipping point here. We have a problem. Then it's like, well, what are the solutions? Can we really do anything about it? Blah blah blah. Now it's like, yeah, we can actually do something about it. Then the next step is how. And I think his point is that there's two things that are very important. It's that technology. You need it's like the stepping blocks. It's not supply or demand driving things. Sometimes like culture's in the way, but at the end of the day, you really need the right kind of technologies being implemented in the right way, and that's the task. How do we create the push the developmental block of green energy or green technology to get us there? Because without that, we're absolutely screwed.
Before every technology, there is an investment that is needed. An investment in monetary term, an investment is an allocation of resource within society. So even if the technology is available, what I'm focusing on is what will make this investment possible and deemed politically or socially acceptable by a collectivity. Which in many scales, even if we have the technology, people will make the choice not to invest in those. So this question I'm asking is, why would they make such a choice?
Yeah, of course it's gonna be, there's power structures and whatever, but what you're missing is that there's not an actual, I mean, most politics is one thing to critique the current system, but another thing is like, what is the actual functional alternative? Where is the actual plan to implement this in a way that works for people that bought a Hummer and that have a mortgage or like a loan on this Hummer or whatever? How do you actually make this work for them? Unless you just take down the government and kill everyone that doesn't agree with you. You know, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, this is. But I see your point, and as you see in the end, that means come here. And of course, what I will now focus is what kind of policies are needed. And of course, I will not say here that the only solution to this is through the whole system. Go from the. I mean, this is. I may agree on you in the critique of capitalism, but I don't think that the kind of this classical discussion will solve the problem we are facing here now. So I'm trying to identify what we may call what are the political challenges to take care of these transformations. And what my intention here has been to be very to the earth, showing one, there are technologies, there are systems there. We don't have to ask for new technologies. It is possible to get up on a path of transformation. Now I will just discuss some of the political means on it. But I don't start with the general question whether we first have to go from something what we may label the capitalist system, of which I'm not a defender at all, in fact, to something we don't know first, and then take this as a second order of question. I don't think there's time for that. Anyhow, I will take this, and then you see what I mean, and then we can take up the discussion. What I talk about is here that we must have what I would say climate talk. That means politicians must come out and say, we are moral political rhetorics. We have a problem. We have to transform. Not only saying we are increasing taxes on fuel. It will don't get people with you. You say, we have to transform the system. We are willing to, we are preparing to say that we want to reduce the car transport. We will use a lot of means for that, allow you to walk more, allow you to go more by buses. We will increase gasoline prices also as a part of it, but those who transform will not be losers. You must have a climate talk showing that we are preparing for the transformation, that our intention is not to make the whole population as a loser. Then the only one who will follow that kind of loser creating policy is some of us in this seminar room who are searching for the best solution, for the only way or something like that. So I think this is an important thing in climate talk. You can consider it. That will include taxation paths. You can't increase fuel taxes immediately. You can't make the heavy cars illegal immediately. You will give people 10 years on them to reduce their dependence on it. You have recently bought a car. You have to reduce your use of it, and then when you sell it, you don't buy a new car. You must have an investment and innovation policy. You make it possible to invest in bus transport, which is cheap, or in railway transport, which is more expensive and have slower effects. You must have a correction package. In fact, you must provide money to the losers. You must help them to get out of their traps. Those who are working have a profession which is strongly related to fossil fuel industry must be helped out of. You can't blame them. And this could be created also in an international level. I have been working with such things on international level. At best, and of course then we will always say, this isn't enough. Nobody is interested in what Sweden does, just 1% of global carbon dioxide emissions. The only thing you can count on is what we may call the snowball effect. This is what I call the climate walk. This has created some interest in international also. Some start to roll the snowball. And identifying that there are other seminar rooms out in Europe and other parts of the world discussing the same things with people doing like this. You will always, when you see that the snowball grows, you will always attract people who will continue to expand it. You can say this isn't enough, and I ask what are the alternatives. We have hitherto always failed to get general agreements all over the world. So instead of waiting for the last one to convince, in Europe, unfortunately, it is Poland. We can start doing this. Northern European countries and others can start with this, and sooner or later Poland will join. Unfortunately, I think it's later, but this is one of the big problems in Europe. So this is what I mean with the climate walk. You start walking here and look what you promised. We start with these things, and if you follow, we continue our walk. So you avoid the kind of leakage effects and things like that. But you must convince people to accept that energy prices will be twice as high. You must convince people to accept that they can't drive their heavy cars. You must get people to accept that if you want to have this classical freedom of school choice, you must solve it in another way. I have some instructions. So there is a need for visions that this is possible. The basic thing is not necessarily to convince the capitalists only. I think it is to convince everybody. There are firms who are losers on this, but there are a lot of firms who are also waiting to be part of the transformation. All those who produce the wind power stations, all those who produce the photovoltaics, all those who build the houses of wooden, all those who will manage the collective public bus transport system. So there are, you can still go skiing, although you take the train up to Åre. This is a new kind of profession. This is a woman repairing wind power stations in Västerbotten. This is the alternative to go to school instead of that. I know this is already in practice in some places in Sweden. The school round. All the children go to a certain point in the block in the morning, 8 o'clock, and then one of the parents take them and they run to school instead of taking the bus, together with the one adult every time. So I mean, there is a need for vision, and that shouldn't, and I didn't put the Louis Vuitton case here. I mean, this was just to provoke you. But it is important to have a vision showing that we are not moving backwards, we are moving to something else, leaving fossil fuels behind us. I think that is the important thing.
Staffan?
Yeah.
I think that we should leave some time for people to discuss.
Yes.
Are you just finishing?
Yeah, I have finished.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Well,
So now, all those questions I didn't answer. All the critical things which you want me to have interventions on, and you have a lot of time in your course. First you.
Thanks for the lecture, by the way. But it kind of seems as if these solutions are focused purely on the Western world and already developed economies. What about developing and emerging economies that don't already have the standard of living that we have? So right now it's more like, oh, what can we do to mitigate climate change by keeping our standard of living? What do you say?
In short, first, I agree with you. I mean, I talked about this, focusing on the Northern European context. I have PhD candidates who are working on that kind. I think one short sentence saying that it isn't necessarily so that all the mistakes which have been done in our part of the world must be done in the third world. Although there is a strong tendency for it, not to least in China. But it is tough. I think the vision there is to show that a part of the standard of living we have here isn't sustainable. Other parts are possible to get to via what we may label a leapfrogging phenomenon. Like you move from not having a telephone at all in Africa to having just a mobile phone, not going via the copper-based phone as we have here, for example. This is leapfrog. You leave some technologies you don't went to go to them. And I would appreciate if the fossil-run, gasoline-driven car is one of those you leave behind. But it is a challenge. So I agree with you, but this is another lecture, so to say. You, and then you.
Yeah, it would be the same.
The same question. And then you.
I have a related question. In Sweden, for example, because you focused on Sweden, do you envision any compensatory measure for the lower class and poor people? Because not everyone maybe is able to pay the bulk price for electricity. I just take this example. But you talked about all this, I don't know, new affluent economy that we would like to have, and that consumes less resources and so on. But what do you envision? Can really all population live in this kind of standards? I'm sure there is poverty still in Sweden.
Of course there is.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you are right.
But you haven't mentioned this at all.
No, there is of course a class dimension in this you can focus on. In fact, I think you can also focus on gender dimension in this. As regards to class dimension, it is well shown that middle class, there is more or less a linear correlation between your income and your carbon and your footprint. So the rich one have a higher footprint than the poor one. So it is. There is a lot of studies on that. So even the poor ones will not even know that they are green by necessity. and not by intention. Yeah, that's one thing. But of course, it is important then what I'm asking for here is trying to get some acceptance for the majority of the people. It is sometimes so that it is easier for part of the middle class to transform, but not necessarily. Those who travel most in the world are middle class, and they are difficult. You are part of that, and it will be very hard to convince you to take the train to your own countries. for example. So it's how to say, I didn't focus on it, but I agree with you that the policy which has to be done here, climate policy correction, must consider that some people who are tougher, have tougher conditions. But you also have, as in all countries, you must have the middle class with you in the transformation. Now, who was it? Was it you?
I don't know. There are some forces driving the economy, for example, growth, as a perpetual growth. And we all know that perpetual growth, when industry grows and the economy is good, the environment suffer and climate suffer.
Yeah.
Japan, for example, they have an economy which is not growing at all for the last years. Would it be possible to transform these underlying forces of the economy to a society which is based on degrowth? Could that be possible, or is it just a vision?
Yeah, I know, and I see that you have a lot of text in that in the course, I think. My focus is somewhat different, in fact. Yeah, you can. But and I think I'm focusing on this. You can see growth may be looked upon as the net effects of all the demand sectors, irrespective of whether you classify them like that or like that. This is the Keynesian classification. This goes through all this. And the net, and then the growth is how much this national product grows based on how much you have from consumption of investments and things like that. But I'm not focusing on the residual or the net growth, whether it is 3% or 2% or 1% or minus. I'm focusing on, irrespective of how you look upon that. I don't say that it by necessity has to be negative. What I say is the important thing is that this goes down. You may say this should be a degrowth in absolute terms. But I'm focusing on that this may well increase. Or is it so that you really don't want to have some prosperity out of your life, so to say? And then the net impact is this added to that, added to that. So I start from bottom up, so to say, instead of discussing the aggregate data down there. And that makes me the approach somewhat different to some of the text I have recognized in your course. And that is part of my message, that it is here you have to discuss railways, buses, reducing the dirty things, building houses of wood, that could probably put some here. And as long as you manage to do that, that is the important thing. You can also say so that transformation, if you produce for 100 billion something, whether the economy grows with 1, 2 or 3 billions is less important than the 100 billion cake can be transformed from a dirty activity to a clean activity. That's the main issue. Now, you.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking, you've been talking, I mean, this transformation which demand very much the role of the state going in order to change something. This is just by public decision, by policy making, and at the end by elections of what parties we want to represent us. So that is one thing, and I think Sweden and all the Scandinavian countries are quite well equipped to do this kind of transformations in comparison to the rest of the world, probably. But then also you are insisted very much in that we have to convince people. Do you see anything that could be just push on people because there is no time to convince people of those changes? I mean, we need radical changes. It's not only transforming railways in 10 years, in 20 years. Don't you see anything that could be on that area?
This includes, what I'm talking, this is important. I think this is the role of politicians, to convince people that we are moving. This was done in the 60s, in fact. By intention in Sweden said we are transforming the economy. I mean, politicians should all say we are transforming the economy. We will create incentives which make it profitable for green firms to grow. It will be more profitable to install photovoltaic systems. It will be more profitable to install wind power systems. It will be profitable to go to produce and deliver electric cars and call it public transport and things like that. And people who transform will be winners. We are suggesting win-win solutions. It is not so that we ask for you to suffer. I think this is a basic thing. But this is not only, policy shouldn't only then of course get people winning, it will also create these incentive structures. I mean, we know now that, let me take an illustration. I know because I'm engaged in something. If you go to Volkswagen, which is a German car producer, they say we can deliver all kinds of cars. The Volkswagen Golf can be delivered in plug-in hybrid, just a standard hybrid. They can be delivered for all kinds of biofuels, etc., etc. And I don't think they can use fuel cells yet, but maybe they can also. But they say we can't. We have no demand for plug-in hybrid Volkswagens in Sweden. It isn't. People don't buy them. The taxation system makes it so. There is no second-hand market. People don't buy them. But we can deliver them. I talk them. The same thing is on buses. Scania and Volvo can today deliver very clean buses for public transport. But the public transport system isn't organized so, and you haven't convinced people to use it. It has the prices to do, it is too cheap to use cars, it has to be convenience to do, and how should you fix the ticketing systems in... but public transport is one thing. You don't...
Yeah, but you see there you have an example, because we're talking about this class question. I mean, those people driving these very fancy cars, couldn't we just push for a policy? Because I mean, it's a group, and they are polluting and they are causing problems. So why do we have to convince them who are producing so much emissions, so to speak? It's just about only by arguments. Okay, you have a win. You have something to win in a 5 years period.
Here we have. I think it's more easy in this seminar room to agree on how a good world should be created. But when going to election, we recently had elections in Sweden, and it is my interpretation, I don't say I am the only one, that election didn't give a mandate for a government to promote radical transformations in the Swedish system. So I mean, and I think politicians have to go out tougher and say, you will never win an election saying only that we will double the price of fuel or gasoline, as I tried to do in 2007. It was written, KTH professor argues double the price of fuel in Svenska Dagbladet on the main front page, and I had to hide.
With your industrial lenses, like if you look at like the most tangible sectors that you could target, isn't it like in terms of energy reduction, like shifting the demand of energy to greener? I mean, isn't like household demand of electricity like 11% of energy consumption? So it's like even if you get every household in Sweden to stop to like progressively shift to greener product demand, right? It's still only going to be like, you know, maybe 20% efficiencies, maybe 40% if something radical happens on 11% of total electricity energy consumption, which is electricity at the household level. So it's going to be like, if you change completely someone's household, like everyone's household demand, and you improve that by 20% to something like 1% net efficiency change, like, or change towards like renewable energy. So that's not really So when you look at so then what is like the biggest target from your perspective that you're aware of? I mean, which sector of if it's not going to be the demand at the household level?
No, I never talked about this here. The Swedish system is reasonably efficient compared to many other countries. What did I say? If I focus on this, assume that I can get acceptance for this. I would say I would really try to work with this could be exported to help in. But you have the problem in Poland because in Poland you have very low energy prices connected to coal. It also creates a lot of employment. And all alternatives in Poland are more expensive than coal for the moment because they are not taxed there. But of course, you can use this for running cars. You can use this for other part of it. You can use also when cleaning the steel mills. You can use this for a lot of things.
You mean the forest?
Pardon?
Forestry, like a fuel, or what do you mean?
Well, this is what you can produce with wind power. But the Swedish system is, the electricity system in Sweden is reasonably clean due to water power and due to high nuclear. And also the heating system in Sweden is reasonably good because we are quite efficient as regards the use of waste.
Yeah.
And then you could also discuss whether you should burn the organic waste or whether you should do something.
But electricity and energy, I mean, it's different, right?
Yeah.
And then even if you shift the electricity that's consumed and you make that, then you still get all the problems with like a different.
Yeah, but I don't have the tables here. But Sweden differs from many other countries as we have relatively low fossil fuel dependency, and that is related. We are similar to France. But what we are, a very high part of it is related to transport. That's the reason why I have transport. So reducing the need of fossil fuels in transport is a dramatic advance in Swedish transformation. In Europe, you have much more related to both to electricity production because of you directly use coal, and especially in Eastern Europe, but not in Germany, or also in Germany. Not as that much in France, where you have nuclear power, and in Spain and Portugal you have wind power to a large extent, and even solar power. That is also the case partly in Italy. But in Central Europe you have a lot of coal. And one means, of course, in a European transmission is to trade electricity. That could be a Swedish export power. But also the other countries in Europe can transform to wind power. So it means, and then of course, instead of discussing exactly how you should do on household level, I don't do that. I think focus on the big things. But electricity in Sweden is clean. So it is also the case.
I mean, they burn it. It's not only burn, like it's waste incineration, like 80% of the energy. We're even shipping trash from Poland. And then I was looking into the actual, for every gram of trash that they burn, there's actually 0.7 to 1.2 grams of emissions from it. And I remember I've been in Vattenfall and I asked him like how many emissions per like what's the input output in terms of emissions.
Let's say so. I agree with you, but it depends on what we mean with clean. I compare with many other countries. What are the main issues in the transformation? I also know that you have one coal-fired power plant in Sweden, which is situated in the middle of Stockholm, for example. As regards the incineration of waste, we can always discuss whether it is a good or bad thing, but as long as it is organic waste, I think it's a good way of using it. Unless you can suggest that it's a better one. Now let's see. I don't know. Shall we take you first and then you? And then I suppose you have other discussions to do also.
Topic.
Yeah.
Are you continuing?
I don't know, it shifts a bit the way I will talk about maybe it's not totally something different.
Start and then we continue with you.
Okay. I would like to ask you to talk a little bit more about the political preconditions that made it possible in the 1960s to drive forward this intentional transformation of the economy. Because right now, what I see problematic from a political science perspective is that it's usually a discussion between the disciplines. Economists now that here seem to say, well, these are the policies and politics should do it. You know, the politicians should just agree on them. And it's like, okay, here. And then in political science, it's always like, yeah, we can't do anything because the real power lies within corporations. And it's like, okay. And no one is talking about this right now as well. So now I would like to find out what made it possible.
I should solve the problem in 2 sentences.
Reform.
No, but I just this is part. As you may identify, I'm trying to identify what is the potential to break out of a lock-in system, to establish a path away from the present, and that you should get acceptance for that path. That's what I'm interested in my book. So that means I try to be I try to build it from below. Then you can transform sectors like this, and then you have to get acceptance for it. And so I abstain from the ideal world of Plan A, the utopian socialists, which I probably would be in favor of, but I think we have to establish the path to get there. The 60s was an alliance between a very dominant social democratic government on the one hand, very strong labor movement, and also large-scale industry, which saw that, differing from many other countries, they could identify that this is a policy where you could get acceptance from the trade unions of closing down a lot of old industries, which was very original in the world. The trade unions welcomed closing down of industries because they were promised by the government that the losers would be taken care of. And industry benefited from it because they could focus on new, higher productive industries. And on the other hand, industries were not allowed to take out their profits. They were funded in the system because if they took out all the profitability of it, they wouldn't get acceptance by the losers or the workers who moved around. By that time, all the big Swedish authorities for labor, Arbetsförmedlingen, and all those systems were shaped with good conditions for those who free schooling or changing your job and all that stuff. It was an alliance, and the intention was to create a win-win-win situation. Then some were losers, of course. In my northern part of Sweden, people were wearing something here, "We don't move." For example, a green little thing. So, but it was generally this kind of, and this was known as the Swedish model. I don't, so what I'm arguing for is something similar. If you want to get acceptance for a transformation, you must get a majority of people with you. And it is also so that irrespective of whether, you must also have the firms with you. It must be profitable to have good behavior in the economy. I don't believe, and you have no empirical evidence, that you first start to destroy the whole economy before you create it, go that way. And I think that is, I'm still back, I think that is one of the weak points in Naomi Klein's literature. She doesn't really solve that problem. But you can discuss that after the course here. Now you have you. And then I think we are, I don't know how your program is, but
I think that we have to finish after a while.
Okay, I thought the focus here with the energy system debate and the debate how efficient the Swedish energy system misses a bit the point, because a lot of the emissions are just embedded in imported consumption. In imported consumption in developed countries, and so I wonder how you would take these into consideration.
I discussed it in my book. I can't talk too much already. You're of that opinion, but that is we all know that. There may be some here who count on it. We all know that we can to the direct emissions, which are calculated on the what should we say, gross domestic emissions in Sweden. We could identify what we call the gross national emissions. That is, what of the Chinese emissions should we relate to the Swedish crown and things. There is a lot of things. I write about it in the book, but we know about this.
I think that we have to finish now. Just 1 minute question. and 1 minute answer, please.
I will try it 1 minute.
Yes, okay,
That'll
thank
be
you.
even faster. It's just a comment. Just I have to voice my discontentment concerning this false duality between what you call the transformation, which is really a mild twitching, and what you say that destroying the economy, which I think is missing the point that David Klein is making in the book. What you're arguing for here is a Green New Deal, Green Keynesianism, just investing in green technology and green transport system, which then, yeah, is a good thing itself. But I think if you go just a bit further away in the spectrum, and then there's a different way you could do this. You didn't really specify how to make this happen, because there are ways to make a Green New Deal that could be detrimental to social justice, other ways that could make it beneficial. So there lays the difference between a good and a bad Green New Deal. But after, if you go further into maybe more ambitious, you don't enter the realm of socialism or destroying capitalism. You know myself, I'm a utopian capitalist, so it's not. I think we should escape this duality there, which is Naomi Klein is trying to do in some way. So I just thought I will put that out there.
Yeah, I see your comment. But I abstain from getting into the debate. That is something which is very natural for you to discuss afterwards. But you had a question.
Yeah, it was just a comment. Not to be the pessimist, but the situation is very different in the 60s to how it is currently. In the 60s, you had strong labour unions. You had a much better balance between capital and labour. Whereas now we have 15 of the world's biggest economies are actually multinationals. You have the potential of TTIP, which is threatening to come into Europe now, and the formation of ISDS courts, which I think creates such a different environment that a new modernity is just not something that I see as a possibility, because governments don't have the same amount of power to implement these policies and these changes to the economy, because corporations are slightly stronger.
I see your point, and maybe I'll take something of you and something related to you. And I'm not used to this situation defending capitalism, because I seldomly do that. But I think what we should think is, this is a fundamental threat to mankind. And it isn't necessarily so that this fundamental threat to mankind is something people want to have, enjoy, even if they are capital owners or managers of big firms. So, so this is an important thing. It isn't necessarily so that the conflicts between labor and capital is identical with the conflict relating to a greener world, a sustainable world. So I'm trying to work in this non-identity between these two dichotomies, between labor and capital on the one hand, and between those who are convinced or not convinced on the necessity to transform into sustainability. That is the narrow terrain where I'm trying to find a solution. And then we may disagree on this. And maybe we are also different in regarding in how optimistic we are. I don't say I'm real optimistic. I say there is a potential. It is possible to solve the problem if you can navigate correctly in this very small terrain, non-identical land, so to say.
What is the problem? What is the threat you're talking about? What is the threat?
The threat is, of course, that we are moving to some kind of tipping point beyond 2 centigrades, where we move away in a non-controllable transformation of the earth.
Climate change.
Yeah.
Why?
What?
Why? Why did climate change begin? This is what I mean. Climate change is the monsters. But this is the symptom. What is the source of this thing called climate change?
Why when you know that, send me, if you know that, I think I have talked a little about it, but if you can identify that, you can send and tell me. What do you mean it is? Is it?
What do you want? You want to find the guilty person, or you want to solve the problem?
It's not matter
the most important
assigning
thing
guilt. It's a matter how do we frame the problem.
Which target do we need? And is this kind of changing the electricity system? Is that going to be enough? And I think that's a real problem
But
because
you
we're
want to
already
find
past.
something to be operated in us rather than climate change?
I want to just be aware of how do we frame the problem, because for me this is going to make this solution either what we need to do, either not efficient, either not relevant. If we just not frame the problem, which I think you didn't, you just starting point as you said climate change, so you didn't frame the problem. And for me, we cannot decide, we cannot evaluate a solution if not in relation to a specifically framed problem. This is why I'm not trying to fight the guilt person, just the framing of the problem.
The causes of the
Exactly.
problem. Yeah.
Okay, this is interesting. I thought, okay, you can consider that in the rest of the course, whether I frame the problem right or wrong, or if I have framed it at all. But maybe we cannot solve it before lunch unless I pick up another set of slides and discuss it from another perspective.